1 Samuel chapter 16 Introduction. This chapter begins the story of David, one of the most outstanding characters in the Bible who served God both with his sword and with his pen. Verses 1 to 5. Samuel is appointed and commissioned to anoint a king among the sons of Jesse at Bethlehem. Verses 6 to 13. All of Jesse's elder sons were rejected. David, the youngest, is selected and anointed. Verses 14 to 23. Saul's growing melancholy made David to be brought in to relieve Saul by music. Thus small were the beginnings of that great man, David. Samuel is appointed and commissioned to anoint a king among the sons of Jesse at Bethlehem. Verses 1 to 5. The declared purpose of God to transfer the kingdom of Israel from other hands to Saul's was not an angry menace, but a fixed and immutable decree. There's a time to mourn, but there's also a time to move on. God tells Samuel, "Fill your horn with oil and be on your way." Note that Saul was anointed with a flask of oil, scanty and brittle. 1 Samuel 10:1. But David with a horn of oil which was more plentiful and durable. Hence, we read of a horn of salvation in the house of his servant David. Luke 1:69. Samuel was called to go to Jesse of Bethlehem because the Lord had chosen one of his sons to be king. The language is remarkable and intimates a difference between the new king and the former king. Saul was the people's choice. The next was the Lord's choice. He was to be from the tribe of Judah, to which the preeminence had been already promised. Genesis 49:10. Bethlehem of Judah, Judges 17:7, was the home of Ruth and Boaz, from whom the family of Jesse descended. Ruth 4:17-22. It was a hilly, grain-growing region with many small grain fields carved into the hillsides. Sheep were being reared in the slopes of the hills. When Samuel arrived at Bethlehem, the elders of the town trembled when they met him. They asked, "Do you come in peace?" Considering what Samuel had just done with the Amalekite king Agag, 1 Samuel 15:33, it's no wonder the elders of Bethlehem were afraid. They trembled, thinking that Samuel had come to denounce some judgments of the Most High against their city. Verse 5. Consecrate yourselves and come to the sacrifice with me. Then he consecrated Jesse and his sons and invited them to the sacrifice. The preparations for sanctification are described in Exodus 19:14-15. While the elders were called to consecrate themselves, Samuel himself took the greatest care in the consecration of Jesse's family. Moreover, Samuel invited them to the sacrifice to share in a special ceremonial meal. Whenever a peace offering was being offered, the offerer had a right to invite any guest he pleased. Here, Jesse's family were Samuel's honored guests. All of Jesse's elder sons were rejected. David, the youngest, is selected and anointed. Verses 6 to 13. Having known that one of Jesse's sons would become king, the selection process for the next king started in their family. Eliab, Abinadab, Shammah, and the other 4 sons of Jesse were made to pass by Samuel. Samuel made the mistake of judging them based on their appearance. This was the same mistake Israel made about their first king Saul. 1 Samuel 10:24. God had a man in mind different from Samuel's or Jesse's expectation. So Samuel asked Jesse, "Are these all the sons you have?" "They're still the youngest," Jesse answered. "He's tending the sheep." This shows the low esteem David had among his own family. First, his father didn't even mention him by name. Second, he wasn't even invited to the sacrificial feast. Third, he was only called to come because Samuel insisted on it. David was humble and duty oriented. The fact that David was out tending the sheep showed that the family of Jesse was not so wealthy, because if they were wealthy, a servant would be tending their sheep. Jesse's family was not affluent enough to have servants. David was faithful in small things that his father had assigned him. Samuel said, "Send for him. We will not sit down until he arrives." Amazing! He that was not called to sit at the table is now waited for as the principal guest. David came. He was glowing with health and had a fine appearance and handsome features. Samuel anointed him in the presence of his brothers with a horn of oil that he had brought. According to Josephus the historian, David was just 10 years old then. Probably no one even dared to think that this was the divine royal anointing. From that day on, the Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon David. The real anointing happened when the Spirit of the Lord came upon David. The oil on the head was just a sign of this inward reality. David had been referred to prophetically before in 1 Samuel 13:14 and chapter 15 verse 28. But 1 Samuel 16:13 is the first mention of his name, which means beloved or loved one. Jesus was born in David's line and was called the Son of David. Matthew 9:27. Samuel, having anointed David, went back to Ramah. He retired to die in peace, since his eyes had seen the salvation, even the scepter brought into the tribe of Judah. Saul's growing melancholy made David to be brought in to relieve Saul by music. Verses 14 to 23. David's extraordinary skill in music was the evidence of the Spirit of the Lord coming upon him. This made him the sweet psalmist of Israel. 2 Samuel 23:1. As the Spirit of the Lord came upon David, an evil spirit from the Lord came upon Saul and tormented him. The Spirit of the Lord, which was upon Saul in 1 Samuel 10:10, departed from him. This meant Saul lost his spiritual protection and covering. Saul's attendants said to him, "See, an evil spirit from God is tormenting you." This was obvious to Saul's attendants, but it does not seem to be obvious to Saul. Often, our spiritual condition is far more apparent to others than it is to ourselves. On Saul's request, messengers were sent to Jesse to call for David. In the East, the command of a king is imperative, and Jesse, however reluctant and alarmed, had no alternative but to comply. So Jesse took a donkey loaded with bread, a skin of wine, and a young goat, and sent them with his son David to Saul as a token of homage and respect. Verse 18. David knew how to play the lyre. He is a brave man and a warrior. He spoke well and was a fine-looking man, and the Lord was with him. David came to Saul and entered his service. Saul liked him very much and gave him the important and trusted position of an armor bearer. God's providence thus prepared David for his royal destiny by leading him to a place where he could become acquainted with the manners of the court, the business of government, and the general state of the kingdom. Unwittingly, Saul was becoming dependent on the one designated to succeed him. 1 Samuel chapter 16. Questions. 1 Samuel chapter 16. Answers.